back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to talk to you about my favorite books I read this year. I'm doing something slightly different this year in that I'm actually separating fiction and nonfiction reads because I read a decent amount of nonfiction, and I feel like it's really hard to group and stagger them all together. So in years past, I've done my top 12 books because it's the 12 days of Christmas. This time I'm doing my top 3 nonfiction and my top 10 fiction. This was a really hard choice because I did complete about 135 books this year and over 41,000 pages, which is a lot of reading. And so there were a lot of things that I read over the year that I loved. There were some that I didn't love. That video is coming tomorrow. And a lot of mediocre books as I was kind of struggling through reading slumps. I think my overall average star rating for the year was like below 4 stars. And usually it's above or around 4 stars, but I think it was like 3.8 or something like that, which is a little bit on the lower side for me. But that being said, I still did read a lot of really excellent books. And I actually had a very hard time narrowing this list down, particularly my top 10 fiction reads. I had about 4 or 5 others that I really wanted to talk about here, but for the sake of time, we're just going to do 10. I'm actually going to start with my nonfiction reads. I will have this divided up into timestamps. So if you're not interested in nonfiction, you can skip over this. Or if you're only interested in nonfiction, you can skip over other parts. So starting with number 3 of my nonfiction is Unbroken. This is the story of a man who was an Olympic runner and was all set to go to the Olympics and all of those things. And then World War II hits and he actually gets drafted to be a fighter pilot, and his plane goes down in the middle of the ocean and he is stranded on this raft with 2 other men for an extended period of time. It is a fascinating story of resilience, and it has a lot of really difficult things, as you might imagine, in it. But it has so much hope and it's so inspiring, especially the end of the book, like really made me cry in the redemption of the story of his life and just how beautifully it was done. Book number 2 is Patriot by Alexei Navalny. This is a memoir written by Alexei Navalny, who, if you've not heard of, was a lawyer in Russia who was very vocally opposed to Putin and had a lot of things happen over the course of his career and his life, and was actually imprisoned multiple times for speaking out against the government. And the last time that he was imprisoned, he died under suspicious circumstances. So the first half of this memoir is him writing his actual memoir and what he intended to be his memoir, and the second half are letters and notes and posts and things that he smuggled out through his lawyer who was visiting him while he was in prison. This was published posthumously, so you do know before you read it that he didn't get out of prison alive. And so there's such a tinge of sadness to reading it and reading what a brilliant mind he was and all of the thoughts that he had, all the amazing things that he did. It's definitely tinged with sadness in that he didn't make it out alive, but he just was an amazing man, and his memoir is extremely powerful. And my number 1 book of the year is a spiritual nonfiction book, and that is Reclaiming Quiet by Sarah Clarkson. This book is all about finding spaces and margins to refresh and rejuvenate yourself spiritually and reconnect with the Lord in a life that doesn't have a lot of margin and doesn't have a lot of quiet space. And I think that that's true of a lot of people. We go through phases in our lives where maybe we do have less going on, but Sarah Clarkson is a busy mom of, I think, either 4 or 5 children, and they're all quite small. And so it makes it really hard to find quiet spaces when you have small children. And then as your children get older, there's lots of activities that keep you busy. Ask me how I know. And it's so important to be able to find margins and create margins of quiet to be able to find rest for your soul and to reconnect with the Lord. And so this book is beautifully written. I think her writing style is absolutely fabulous. It's so lovely, but there's practicality in this as well, which I really appreciated. That the end of each chapter has like reflection questions for you to be able to put the things that you've read into practice in your own life. And it's not only beautifully written, but also just so powerful and was an absolutely life-changing book for me. Okay, let's get into the fiction. Like I said, there are 10 on this list. We do have some classics, we have some literary fiction, we have some translated fiction, we have some fantasy, kind of a little mix of genres here. Number 10 is just a feel-good book, and that's Parnassus on Wheels. This is a story of a woman who ends up purchasing a traveling book wagon because she's a bit discontent in her life. And so she goes around traveling around the countryside trying to sell books to people. And this book was just really wonderful and had some of the most beautiful quotes about books. It was just such a book for book lovers, and it wasn't anything like super particularly deep, but I read this book in January and I still think about it all the time. So it definitely has staying power with me. So I felt like it deserved a spot on this list. Number 9 is probably my biggest surprise of the year, and that's Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I've been talking about this book all year as well. I read this book in January and it sunk its talons into me and would not let me go. This is the first in a series, and I have gone on and tried to read the others. I read book 2 and didn't like it that much, started book 3, didn't finish it. So I'm content with keeping my level of this series at just book 1. That's okay with me. This is the story of this area called Area X that is very mysterious. There are weird things going on, and the outside world is sending these expeditions into Area X to explore and figure out what's going on there, and they're supposed to report back. But when people come back, if they come back at all, they're not the same as they were when they left. And so we follow this biologist along with several other people who are part of her expedition as they are going into this area to try to figure out what's going on. And we intersperse that with flashbacks of why she wanted to go to Area X and all of these things, as well as exploration of the things there that are just totally foreign and strange, and it feels almost fever dream-esque, the things that are happening there, because you're questioning what is really happening, or like, is this really real, or is this just this person's perception because this area is messing with their minds? And it is just like very interesting. Not my normal kind of book. It's like kind of sci-fi, kind of horror, very unsettling, and you don't really get any answers. But this was a book that I stayed up until 1:30 in the morning to finish, and I can't remember the last time a book did that to me. It's really bizarre and really strange, and it's not a book I would widely recommend. So even though I'm saying this is on my top 10, I'm not telling you to go out and read it, because you might want to do a little bit more research first, because like I said, it's really, really weird. There's some body horror in it. There's things that I don't typically gravitate towards, but for whatever reason, it just sucked me in. I almost didn't include number 8 on this list because I was afraid of it simply being recency bias, and that's Time of the Child by Niall Williams. This is an Irish literary fiction that I literally finished today, and so I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should be including this. Like, do I just love this because I just finished it, or do I really love it? But I've been saying since I first started this book that it has some of the loveliest prose that I have ever read in my entire life. And for that alone, I feel like it needs to be here. Not only are sentences beautifully crafted and have just really sets the scene, but there are just such poignant moments of wisdom in the way that the author phrases things that he talks about in this book, and the themes that he talks about new birth and aging, and just like there's so many different elements to this that all come in together, regret, new beginnings. There's all these things that are juxtaposed that I found to be so beautiful and so meaningful. So this is a story of a tiny, tiny Irish town. And in this town, we're mostly following a doctor who has been the doctor there for decades, has raised his children there. He's now a widower who is living with some regrets. His other children have moved away, but his oldest daughter still lives with him and helps him in his practice. So they're the people that we're mostly following. And any description that you would read of this book tells you that there's a moment where there's a child that comes into their lives, and that this changes everything. It changes them, it changes the town, it changes the way that they view the world, all those kinds of things with this baby that comes into their life. But that doesn't even happen until we are like halfway through the book, pretty much. And so it's very slow moving, very slow paced, has a prose that is to be savored. And so I don't think it's necessarily going to work for everybody in every situation. It's one of those books where I feel like maybe you need to be in the mood for a book that is like this slow. But I just felt like it was really insightful, really beautiful. One of those books that when you're done, you just like stare at the wall and think about life. And I have another book like that here in this list, but I feel like even though I just finished this book today, I think I'm going to be thinking about it for a really long time. Number 7 is the only Japanese translated book that made it into my top 10. I've read a lot of Japanese literature this year, particularly cozy literature, and this definitely falls into that category, and this is The Lantern of Lost Memories. This story has such an interesting premise. If you've heard the phrase, "my life flashed before my eyes," when people are talking about a near-death experience, that's kind of what this book is about. It's set in a way that when you die, you go to this holding room where there's this lantern that will play things from your life. And so as you're sitting in this waiting room, you have to take one photo for every year of your life. And when you have chosen those moments of your life, it comes down and it plays, and you see all those moments, one per year for the entirety of your life. So there are people who come to this place that die really young and they don't have as many photos. And there are people who have lived a long, full life. And so there's a lot for them to sort through. But as each subsequent person comes into kind of this holding room, there are photos that maybe are messed up or scuffed up because those memories have been revisited so many times in that person's mind. They are then able to take a camera and go back in time to that one day and see that day again. It's just really interestingly done. It's stereotypical of Japanese cozy literature in that it deals with kind of heavier topics in a very gentle way, particularly, grief and regret and things like that. There is some trigger warnings for child abuse as well, if that's something that is really difficult for you to read. But the thing that I found really interesting about this is that most cozy Japanese literature is incredibly episodic, to where there's just the barest of threads connecting the stories. The thing that felt really special about this book in particular is that the final story of this collection of stories actually wraps them up and kind of brings us back to the beginning and brings everything full circle and ties all of the stories together in a very meaningful way. And so I think that that really made this particular book stand out from the other books that I read in this genre. Next, we have another book that made me think very, very deeply, and that's Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is my third of his books, and it is by far my favorite. I have never had another one of his books make it into my top books of the year, but this one was just phenomenal. This is kind of a futurist, it's like sci-fi meets literary fiction because it is set in the future, but in a world that feels not too dissimilar from the one in which we currently live. In this world, there are these robots called AFs, or artificial friends, that are purchased to be companions to children, because children in this time, a lot of their schooling and things takes place online, a lot of interactions are online, and so they need these robots to kind of help them learn socialization, and it also helps the parents. It's kind of like almost like a built-in like companion or babysitter as well. And so it's a very interesting story in which we follow Clara, who is an AF, and her viewpoint on life, the family that has chosen her, how she interacts with them. And it just has very, very deep questions about what does it mean to be human, humans' relationship with technology, hope, faith. All of these things are very deeply entwined in the story. And something that I really love about Ishiguro is I don't feel like he's giving you a particular answer on a platter to these questions. I think he has things that he's pointing out, but everything feels very open. And so I feel like there are multiple different ways you could interpret this story. And so I feel like that leaves this to be a book that is very open to discussion. I read this with my in-person book club, and we did have some fantastic discussion about this book because there were so many things to talk about. So I am still thinking about this book on a near daily basis, and I read it months ago. I'm cheating with spot number 5 because this is actually a trilogy, but I'm not individually ranking the books in this trilogy. I read the whole thing, and it deserves to be in its own spot, and that's the Live Ship Trader series by Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb is by far becoming my favorite fantasy author. The way that she writes is so deep. She may have some very beautifully crafted sentences here and there, but really what gets me is her characterization. She does flesh out a world. She does like make everything feel so real, but what is really, really real is the way she develops the characters, the way that she makes them very fleshed out and makes them feel like real people. In fact, a lot of the people that you will encounter on the pages of the books that she's written will feel like people that you've met in your real life at some point, even though they're in a totally different world. Live Ship Traders is the second trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings series that Robin Hobb has created. So I have read the Farseer trilogy, and now we're on Live Ship Traders, which feels very different from Farseer. This takes place in an ocean setting where we are following some families who are traders, and so they have ships and they travel and they trade goods and all of those kind of things. And then there are also characters who are pirates trying to steal trading ships and all of these kinds of things. So it's interesting. We're following a lot of different viewpoints. The really magical and interesting thing about this book is that these trader families have what are called live ships. These ships are made of a special type of wood that the members of the family kind of pour their memories into, and after a certain amount of time, these ships gain sentience and then come to life and are able to speak and communicate, and it's just really, really fascinating. I do think it's more gritty than the Farseer trilogy, and the Farseer trilogy had its share of grit. But when you're dealing with seafaring folks and pirates, there's an extra layer of grit there, I think, which is not unexpected, at least not for me. This trilogy really had it all. Lots of adventures, lots of character development, lots of plot twists, lots of development to the world that Hobb has created, and reveals of her magic system and things that were questioned in the Farseer trilogy. There are things that we get answers to here, but there's much more to discover, as I am not even halfway through all of the Realm of the Elderlings stories, but I'm excited to get to more Hobb in 2026. Number 4 is another more recent read that I read this fall, and that's Wives and Daughters. This is my third Gaskell that I've read, and I didn't love the 2 Gaskells I read before this. I liked them, but I didn't love them. So I was hoping Wives and Daughters would be the exception, that I'd really, really love this Gaskell, but I did approach this read with just a little bit of apprehension, because I knew, first of all, that Gaskell did not complete this book before she died. So I knew that it would have a feeling of incompleteness at the end of it, and then it's also far longer than the other books of hers that I've read. However, I needn't have worried. I loved literally every second of reading this book. I actually had a pretty difficult reading month in October, where a lot of the books that I read felt really meh and were making me feel kind of slumpy, but Wives and Daughters was the one book that I just wanted to continue reading and wanted to come back to over and over and over again. This is the story of Molly Gibson, who is the daughter of a widowed doctor. She's coming to an age where she is beginning to receive attentions from other people, and the doctor is realizing it would be really helpful if she had a mother figure to help her navigate some of these things. So he decides he's going to remarry, and so you have Molly interacting with her new stepmother and a new stepsister who is the exact same age as her. And then you also see their interactions with other people in town. And while there is some drama and some sorrow, as Gaskell's books always have some sorrow, I think at least one person dies in every single Gaskell I've read so far. But even though there is some tragedy and there is some drama, this is a mostly quiet story. But I loved Molly as a character. I bought into her immediately, fell in love with her, was rooting for her as I watched her grow and try to become more selfless and more kind and more supportive and all of those things. So this is one of those books that the moment I was done with it, I was like, I can't wait to reread this. Number 3 is another classic, and it's one that deeply moved my heart and I cried so much when I read this book. And I actually vlogged this one for my Patreon, actually Wives and Daughters too. I also vlogged, and Time of the Child. So there's a couple Patreon vlogs on here. But I vlogged this for my patrons, and I couldn't even talk about this book without crying in that vlog. That book is Adam Bede by George Eliot, who is fast becoming my favorite Victorian author. Her books are just marvelous. Her prose is really, really beautiful, but it does require more of you. So I do have to be in the right headspace to read George Eliot, because I need to be able to focus. If I can't focus on it, then I'm going to miss a lot of the beauty and the depth that she has there. Adam Bede is a story really of Adam and his brother, but they're not the only focus. We follow these two brothers, but then we also have Dinah and her cousin who are living in another home, and there's a lot of dynamics that are happening there that are difficult to explain without giving away much of the plot. But I feel like the main point of the book is to contrast Dinah and Hetty, I think her cousin is. I'm hoping I'm remembering that correctly. Dinah is a convert of the Methodist Church and is actually going around and preaching, open air preaching, and just has the love of Christ. And Hetty is much more vain and proud. And so there's a clear contrast happening between these two girls as they're living in this town and kind of getting some attention from Adam and his brother and some other people in town. And so there's a lot of dynamics at play here. But I thought it had one of the most beautiful and pure examples of Christ-like love that I've seen in any book ever. Like, it was just so incredibly beautiful that it moved me to tears, and I couldn't even talk about it without crying. And I feel like Dinah is now one of my favorite characters in all of literature. Number 2 is another Irish literary fiction, and that's Foster by Claire Keegan. I read this one closer to the beginning of the year. It's just a tiny, tiny little novella about this young girl whose family has fallen on hard times, and the mother's about to have another baby, and they just need a little help. They've bitten off a little more than they can chew. So they decide they're going to drop off their daughter with some distant relatives that they don't even know that well. And these relatives take this tiny little girl in, no questions asked, and just start loving her. Over the course of this short little novella that takes place over the course of a summer, you see this little girl blossom and change as she's loved, but then you also see the husband and wife who take her in change because they love her. And so it's just such a beautiful little story of how love not only transforms those around you, but also transforms you. In contrast to Time of the Child, even though they actually have some very similar themes, I feel like Foster's language is quite sparse in comparison to Niall Williams. But I feel like Claire Keegan really trusts her readers to be able to buy into what she's doing, even with so few words. She's able to communicate such depth of emotion and themes. And when I finished this book, I was just sitting in a puddle for about 10 minutes, unable to do anything. It was so beautiful. I read it in one sitting. Book number 1 is also a classic, and I feel like if you ask me on a different day, there's a chance that these top 4 books could be interchangeable. My answer for today of what my number 1 book of the year is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I've loved Ray Bradbury for a couple of years now. It started when I read Something Wicked This Way Comes with my in-person book club, but it didn't end there. I've continued to read his books, but somehow I managed to never read Fahrenheit 451 in high school or in college or in any of my adult years until this year, and I'm so glad that I read it. You've probably heard about Fahrenheit 451. It is in fact a dystopian novel, and it is so insightful. It's really about book burning, as you might be able to tell from the cover of the book. We follow Guy Montag, who is a fireman, but he's not a firefighter. Instead, what he does is he sets books ablaze because it is illegal in this world to have books. The thing that was really astonishing about this book is I thought that the book would be about book burning, and that would be like the main subject. But really what's haunting about this book is not so much that books are illegal and books are banned and books are being burned. What's really haunting is that most people don't seem to care. They don't know what they're missing. They don't want books. The idea of books is abhorrent to them, and they'd much rather be glued to screens than ever pick up a book. And it's so reminiscent of how the world nowadays is that it's utterly terrifying. Some of the ways that he kind of talked about how people thought and how people viewed books and viewed entertainment and all of those things in their thought process and their inability to think for themselves was very eerily reminiscent. And there are even things like these inventions called seashells, of things people would put in their ears and they could play music or be able to talk to other people who also had one, and all these things, and they're essentially AirPods. And so it's amazing to me how often you see in dystopian novels these kind of technological advances and inventions that now we have 50 to 75 to 100 years later. And my theory is that tech companies read dystopian novels to get ideas of things to create. That's really what it feels like, you know, that they're like, oh, that's a cool idea. How can we actually make that happen? Anyways, this book was equal parts disturbing and eerie, but also not bereft of hope in pure Bradbury fashion. The end of the book is so beautifully done, and I can't really say anything else without giving things away, but it's just honestly kind of a perfect book. Well, those are my top books of the year, top 10 fiction, top 3 nonfiction. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. If you've read any of the books that I talked about here, I would love to hear your thoughts, of course. But I would be even more excited to find out what are your favorite books of the year. If they are fiction, nonfiction, whatever they are, I would love to hear what your favorite books are and why they have affected you so deeply, or why they have stuck with you, or why they're favorites. Please share with me in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me and also more of the 12 Days of Christmas, and I will see you again tomorrow.